Okay, time to get started. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Teacher Webinar 8. Today's topic is developing empathy and understanding the needs in your community. This is the second part in our new webinar series on the topic of cultivating entrepreneurial mindsets and preparing young people for the future, a journey from business idea to plan. Today's webinar is brought to you by Teach a Man to Fish. We are an educational charity based in the United Kingdom whose mission is to empower young people with the skills that they need to succeed in school, work, and life. For those of you that haven't attended any webinars before and don't know me, my name is India Jankel and I work on our wonderful educational program, the School Enterprise Challenge. Now, before we start, I'd just like to quickly share some ground rules for today. You'll notice that you're all on mute at the moment. That's because there's quite a lot of us here in the room today. So we can't all be speaking at once, but don't worry because there'll be plenty of opportunities later on to share your thoughts. At regular points in the webinar, I will be asking you questions, which you can either answer via the chat box, which a few of you are already using now to introduce yourselves, or via the various polls which will appear on your screen. And if at any point you have a question for me, please make sure to put it in the Q&A section, and that way I'll be sure to see it and answer it for you. And just so you know, this webinar is also being streamed live on Facebook, so hello to those of you that are watching on Facebook. I won't actually be able to see your comments on Facebook, but my colleague Susanna will kindly be over there answering any questions and comments that you leave on Facebook. Okay, so that's all the ground rules. It would be great if you could just take a few moments now to introduce yourself to the others. So please comment in the chat box with your name, which country you're from, and maybe let us know whether this is your first webinar or if you've taken part in the previous ones. I'll just give you about 30 seconds or so to introduce yourselves now. So I can see already that we've got some teachers here today from Nigeria, from India, South Africa, Iraq, Nepal. A very, very warm welcome to you all. It's great to have you here. Okay, so let's get started and let's take a look at what we're going to be covering today. So today's webinar is going to be around 45 minutes to an hour. And in the next hour, we will be looking at, first of all, what is empathy and how is it relevant to business planning? Then I will explain how empathizing fits into the design thinking process and how your students can choose a theme to focus on the following activities. I'm going to be explaining 3 activities which you can do with your learners to help them develop their empathy skills and really understand the needs and problems in their community that they could address with a school business. So the 3 activities that I'm going to be explaining are empathic interviews, empathy maps, and creating a problem statement. And tomorrow I will be sharing with you all a link to a survey. And when you complete the survey after the webinar, you will be emailed a certificate of attendance. And I'll also be sharing these presentation slides and a list of useful resources with you by email tomorrow morning. So there's no need to take notes of what's on the screen if you don't want to. Okay, so I hope that sounds good to you all. Now it's time to really get started. So as I mentioned earlier, today's webinar is the first part in our new series, Cultivating Entrepreneurial Mindsets and Preparing Young People for the Future, a journey from business idea to plan. So in the last webinar, we explored the topic of entrepreneurial mindset, and we looked at what characteristics people with an entrepreneurial mindset tend to have. And one of the characteristics which we identified is that people with an entrepreneurial mindset see problems as opportunities. We also discussed their purpose and how entrepreneurial people understand that they create value by making themselves useful to other people. So today we're going to be looking at this in a bit more detail and discussing exactly how your students can understand the problems and needs in their community and develop their empathy skills with a truly human-centered business solution. Now, before we do that, I would just like to briefly talk about the School Enterprise Challenge and how this topic of understanding the problems and needs in your community fits into the School Enterprise Challenge program. So I'm going to launch a quick poll on screen, and please do let me know, have you ever taken part in the School Enterprise Challenge before? So I'll just give you a few seconds to vote on screen now and let me know if you have ever taken part in the School Enterprise Challenge before. Okay, I'll give you a few more seconds to finish voting. Okay, so it's about half and half, but slightly more of you say that you have taken part before, which is great. But for those of you that don't know, the School Enterprise Challenge is a free educational program run by us here at Teach a Man to Fish. And for the last 10 years, we have been supporting participants who are teams of students and their teachers from all around the world to plan, set up and run their very own real student-led businesses. And so school teams come up with exciting and innovative business ideas. They write their own business plan, and then they go on to actually launch and run their business, selling a real product or service to real people and earning real money. And over the years, we've seen school teams set up all sorts of exciting businesses like tuck shops, plant nurseries, handicrafts, stationery. And so those of you that already have a school business up and running, maybe you can let the others know in the comments what it is. And the School Enterprise Challenge is divided into 3 award levels, and they are bronze, silver, and gold. So if you've never taken part before, you would be joining on the bronze level, which is for schools that have never run a school business before. So the activities that I'm going to be sharing today will be really useful for the beginning of your entrepreneurial journey, as your students will explore the problems and needs of the people in their community, which will help them later on to come up with a business idea to help them. But that being said, if you're currently taking part on the silver or gold level, which is for schools that are more experienced in running a school business, then what we'll be discussing today is still going to be relevant to you, because these activities will help your students to gain a deeper understanding and empathy towards their existing and potential new customers. So if you're not already signed up, you can find out more and register for free to take part on our website, which is www.schoolenterprisechallenge.org. Okay, so I wanted to mention that because before schools sign up to the School Enterprise Challenge, lots of teachers often ask us if they need to already have a business idea in mind. And in fact, the opposite is true. So our educational materials will guide your team through the process of coming up with a great business idea and plan. And it's actually best to start with a completely open mind and not have a fixed idea of exactly what type of business you want to set up. And by going through the process of coming up with a business idea, which we're going to be talking about in today's webinar and in the next 2 webinars, you will make sure to settle on a business idea, product or service which is feasible and desirable to your customers. Put simply, it means that you'll design a product or service which people want and need to buy. So let me just give you a quick example of why it's so important to understand your users and potential customers. So back in the 1940s, the US Air Force suffered from lots of plane crashes. They had as many as 17 plane crashes a day. And initially, the Air Force presumed that the reason that there were so many accidents is because they had switched to using faster and more complex aeroplanes. But after some research, they discovered that the real reason behind so many accidents is actually because they had designed the plane's cockpits and helmets to conform to the dimensions of the average soldier's body. And they then did a study of over 4,000 Air Force pilots, which revealed that none of the pilots fell within the dimensions of the supposed average man. So it's no wonder the pilots had problems with using the planes. And in the end, they created adjustable equipment to fit most soldiers' bodies, thereby solving the problem. So as you can see, it doesn't end well when you design a one-size-fits-all solution to a problem, or if you launch a product or service based on assumptions or without having carried out enough research. So when coming up with a business idea or business solution, a good place to start is with truly understanding people's needs. In other words, empathizing with your potential customers. Now, empathizing with users and defining their needs and problems and insights are the first two phases of design thinking. So before we go any further, I'd like to know, have you heard of design thinking before? I'm going to launch another poll on screen now, and you can let me know by voting yes, no, or I'm not sure. Have you ever heard of design thinking? Great, I'll just give you a few more seconds to finish voting. Okay, we will end the poll there because the majority of you have voted now. So about 50% of you have never heard of it, about 40% say yes, and the remaining 10% are not sure. Thank you very much, everyone, for letting me know. So for those of you that haven't heard of design thinking before or haven't heard about it in a while, essentially it is a human-centered design approach which helps us to understand users, to challenge our assumptions about those users or customers, and to redefine problems as a way to identify creative and innovative strategies and solutions which might otherwise not be immediately apparent. And some of the world's leading brands, such as Apple, Google, and Samsung, have adopted the design thinking approach in their product design. And it's also being taught at leading universities around the world, such as Stanford, Harvard, and MIT. So as you can see on screen, the process of design thinking generally involves 5 phases, which are to empathize with your users, to define your users' needs, their problems and insights, to ideate by challenging your assumptions and creating ideas for innovative solutions to those problems, to prototype by starting to create solutions and testing them is the final step. So today's webinar is going to focus on the empathize and define phases of design thinking as a process for coming up with a business idea which will meet users' needs and solve some of their problems. So before we go any further, I just wanted to take a moment to think about what exactly empathy is and to make sure that we're all on the same page. So please do take a moment now to let me know in the chat box, what does empathy mean to you? How would you define empathy? And I'll just give you a minute or so to do that now, and then we'll have a look at some of your answers. Okay, great. So a few of you have answered already. You're saying that empathy is what we can feel for others, feeling what other people are feeling, putting yourself in someone else's shoes. Exactly right. The sense of feeling other people's feelings. Amazing. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. That's exactly right. So empathy is our ability to see the world through other people's eyes and to share someone else's feelings or experiences by imagining what it would be like to be in that person's situation. Of course, we're all different, so we can't fully experience things the way someone else does, but we can attempt to get as close as possible by putting aside our own preconceived ideas and choosing to understand the ideas, the thoughts, and the needs of other people instead. And empathy helps us to gain a deeper appreciation and understanding of people's emotional and physical needs and the way that they see and understand and interact with the world around them. So before we move on to think about how your students can use and develop empathy in their business planning, I just wanted to take a moment to ask a little bit about how empathy works in your school and how you feel that being empathetic has worked in your school environment. So it could be with learners or with teachers. I'd just like to take a couple of minutes to explore that together. So please feel free to write your answer in the comments and tell me a bit more about how empathy works in your school environment. And maybe any examples that you can share of how you yourself or how your students or other teachers demonstrate empathy at your school. Okay, so the comments are starting to roll in. Kamal says, by involving people in collaborating together. And Sunil adds, adding understanding students' feelings. Tamala said, by listening to the children's problems. And Sunil also added, by having a personal connection with students and with each other. And I like this comment from Weisler saying it's empathy is by showing concern about others in need. So whether that's fellow students or teachers. Great, thank you everyone for sharing your thoughts on that. So it goes to show that empathy, it's an important thing to have in your day-to-day life at school. But it's also a crucial part of developing a successful business, because we can only fully understand and design a desirable product or service when we properly understand people's needs, their experiences, their wants, and their preferences. And there's a nice quote which I think explains it well by Tina Barreto, who works in the design team at Airbnb. And she says, "It's amazing how innovative you can be if you're thinking outside yourself. By not designing for ourselves, we can incite better experiences." And big companies like Google have even gone as far as making it part of their principles. And part of Google's philosophy is focus on the user and all else will follow. So to bring this to life, I wanted to share with you an example of an incredible life-saving product which was designed with empathy. So in many countries, as you'll probably know, access to incubators is limited by cost and by distance. And millions of premature babies sadly die every year as a result of that. And Jane Chen turned this crisis into an opportunity to develop a product which would save lives. So I'm going to play you now a little video to tell you some more about that. Okay, so as you saw, what's great about the Embrace warmer is that it's capable of going where no incubator could go before, because it's portable and it's comparatively so much cheaper, to produce than incubators. So instead of mothers needing to leave their babies in hospitals which are far away and which they might not have access to, mothers can use a portable warmer which serves the same need. And what's more, whilst it's clear that empathy is really valuable in the context of product and service design and running a successful business, it's also an important life skill which will help young people, our students, in their life after school. Because when students grow up, if they're able to truly empathize with their colleagues, then they will be able to anticipate and understand their needs better. They'll be able to come up with business solutions, and that will make them an indispensable employee. So in a moment then, I'm going to introduce you to some activities which your students can do to help develop their empathy skills and better understand the needs of the people in the community that they want to serve. But first, if your students are new to the School Enterprise Challenge, it might help them to start by thinking about a theme that they might like to address through their school business. So picking a theme which they can keep in mind in the following activities will help your students to get into the mindset of using their school business to solve problems and to play their part in improving the world and becoming change makers in their community. So it's completely up to you and your students what theme they pick. It just needs to be something which interests them and they're passionate about. So for those of you who took part in webinar 7 on the entrepreneurial mindset and completed the My Superhero Profile activity, you can get your students to look back at what they identified as their values and what motivates them. And that might be a good starting point to coming up with a theme. So I'll just share with you now a few examples of possible themes that your students might like to focus on for these activities if they don't already have a school business, or if they're looking at expanding in a different direction. So the first one could be reducing poverty in your community. So ensuring that people have access to meet their basic needs like food, health, and education. The second one is improving nutrition in your community, so making sure that everyone has access to a reliable source of healthy, nutritious food. The third theme is improving health and well-being in your community. So here you can think about both improving mental health and physical health. Another theme you could focus on would be education, improving education in your community, whether that be after school, during school holidays, or for young people who don't have the opportunity to go to school. The next theme is gender equality, ensuring gender equality in your community. And the final example is addressing environmental issues in your community, like, for example, plastic pollution. And these are just examples of some themes that we like. You might come up with different ones depending on the interests of your students, or ones that are particularly linked to your curriculum, and that's absolutely fine. Choosing a theme is just a starting point for the next activities, and it won't be set in stone. So if your students' research leads them in a different direction, so in other words, if they discover new problems which they think are more pressing than the first one they thought of and that they would prefer to address them, that is absolutely fine. Okay, so once your students have come up with a theme that they would like to address, a good way that they can then start to learn more about and start to better understand the needs and problems of the people in their community is by carrying out interviews. And if you've taken part in the School Enterprise Challenge before, then your students might already be familiar with doing interviews as part of their market research. The thing is, though, traditional market research aims to collect facts about people, such as the amount of food they eat. And it is important, traditional market research, and it is something that your students will need to do later in the business planning process. But before they do that, it's a good idea to start with empathic research. And empathic research is different to traditional market research because it's more about understanding people's motivations and thoughts. So, for example, why they prefer to sit at home watching TV instead of doing exercise. So the first step is to get your students to draft their interview questions. And I'm going to go through some example questions now, but these aren't the exact ones that your students need to use. They are very welcome to adapt the questions and to add their own, depending on the theme that they've chosen they want to focus on, or what type of school business they already have running. So the first questions are getting to know you questions, and these questions will help your learners just to break the ice with the people that they're interviewing, and to help people feel comfortable during the interview process. So they're quite straightforward. We suggest you just start with, what is your name? Tell me a little bit about yourself. Where do you live? Who do you live with? And what do you do? So for example, are you in work, are you in school, or are you looking for a job? And once your learners have got the interviewees feeling comfortable, then you can move on to some problem discovery questions. So these are the questions which can help your learners to find out about the problems that people in their community are facing. So some of the questions that we suggest at this stage are: what is the hardest part of your day? What tasks take up most of your day? What product do you wish you had that doesn't exist yet? And what is the hardest part about being a, whatever the occupation is that they have? And then finally, we move on to product discovery questions. So these are ones that can help you to understand what sorts of solutions the people that you're interviewing might be looking for. So the examples of questions in the product discovery phase are, what do you think could be done to help you with the problem that they've told you about in the previous section? What would your ideal solution to this problem look like? And what are you currently doing to solve this problem? So after your students have finalized their interview questions, as I mentioned earlier, these are just examples and your students can definitely adapt them and add their own. So once they've finalized what questions they're going to ask, then get them to go out and ask their interview questions to at least 10 people. And the more people they interview, the better, because then they'll get much richer insights. So for example, if they had decided when they were picking their theme that they wanted to focus on improving health and well-being in the community, then, for example, they might choose to interview some busy business people because they might think that they would be stressed or not have too much time to exercise. And don't forget, this is just a starting point, and if the interview research ends up throwing up different challenges, which might make better business ideas or something which the students are more interested in focusing on, then that's okay, and they can then do more research down that route. And of course, if it's not possible to interview people in person because at the moment, because it's not safe to do so, then your students can certainly do this over the phone or with a video call program like Zoom, for example. So those are the questions, and I also wanted to share with you a few tips which you can share with your students to help them really get the most out of the interviews. So the first one is remember to be polite and to make sure that the people that you're interviewing feel comfortable and relaxed. So at the beginning, your students should explain who they are and what they're doing, and make sure to thank the interviewees for their time at the end. The second tip is to make sure to take notes of what your interviewees say and do, because your students are going to need to refer back to them in the next activity. The third tip is to keep an open mind and don't be judgmental. This one is really, really important because we want your students to absorb what the people that they're interviewing are going through, to put themselves in their shoes, in other words, to empathize with them rather than to pity or feel sorry for them, so to sympathize with them. The next top tip is to show active interest with body language, for example. Make sure to show that you really want to know more, that you care about the people that you're interviewing, and you're really interested in what they have to tell you. Next, make sure to take your time to understand what it is that people are telling you, and don't be afraid to adapt the questions. So you can certainly ask follow-on questions to clarify anything that is not quite clear. And the final tip for your students is to look for patterns in what people are telling them. So to try to look out for any common themes in the answers between all of the interviewees, and also any differences. Okay, so there you have it. That is how you do an empathic interview. And we hope that this exercise will help your students to develop their empathy skills by talking and listening to the people they interview, by standing in their shoes, and trying to truly understand their problems, feelings, and experiences without any judgment. I'm going to carry on to explain the second activity because they are linked, and then at the end I'll make sure to leave time for you to give me your comments and ask any questions about these activities. So the second activity, once your students have collected lots of information about their potential customers through their empathic interviews, and then the next step is going to be to analyze the information that they've collected. So reviewing and sieving through lots of information to be able to identify like nuggets of knowledge and insights is a really essential skill for any entrepreneur, because it will help your students to identify potential solutions and great business opportunities. So for this activity, you're going to start by dividing your students into smaller groups according to the number of people that they interviewed. So for example, if you have 30 students and they interviewed 10 people, then you're going to have 10 groups of 3 students for the next activity. And it is important that your students try to do this in small teams rather than individually, because this activity requires a certain amount of interpretation of the information that they got from the interviews. So you want to make sure that everyone gets the opportunity to share their interpretation of what problems they think the people that they interviewed are really facing, what products or services they might be looking for. So this exercise will help your students to establish a common understanding and to understand and prioritize the needs of the people that they interviewed. So each group is going to draw an empathy map about one of the people that they did the empathic interview with. So for each person that was interviewed, you're going to have one empathy map. And I will explain in a moment exactly how your students will do that. So an empathy map is just a visual representation of what users or customers say, what they think, what they do, and what they feel. And analysing the information which your students collected in the interviews by creating empathy maps will help your students to draw conclusions and to have a clearer picture of the needs of their potential customers and any insights they can garner which might inform a business idea. So to create the empathy maps, get your students to divide a big piece of paper into 4 sections with a circle in the middle. And below that, they need 2 boxes. I'll show you on the next slide what it should look like. This is an example of what your piece of paper would look like. Ours is in colour, but it's absolutely fine just to do it in black and white, or to display it slightly differently if you're doing this online with like a shared Google Doc or something like that. So next, I'm going to go through each section one by one and explain how your students are going to fill in this empathy map template. So in the middle, they first of all will write who the user is that they interviewed. So for example, a student, a parent, an elderly person, a business person, whoever it was that they interviewed. And then in the top left-hand corner, your students are going to start by noting down what it is that the user says. So these should be direct quotes or keywords from the interviews. And these are things that the person that you interviewed said out loud. And it's just, you don't need to note down everything, of course, but just the things which your students feel are really significant to their research topic. So for example, it could be like things such as, I don't know where to begin to keep healthy. I want to get fit, but traditional gyms are very boring and expensive. I'm so busy, I don't have time. I'm very stressed, I want to relax, and I don't have a lot of money. So that's the first section. That one's quite an easy one. Then in the top right corner, your students should note down what the user thinks and feels. And this part is a bit harder because these might not be things that the user explicitly said in the interview. So this is where your students are going to have to interpret what the interviewee said and to empathize with them, to imagine what they think and feel based on what they said in the interview. And they can do this by thinking about the following questions. So what matters to the user? What occupies their thinking? What does the user dream of? What worries and aspirations do they have? What frustrates them? What motivates them? What makes them feel bad? And what makes them feel good? So in this example, the students have noted down the people that they've interviewed dream of being successful in work, meeting deadlines, and getting a promotion. And they want to be healthy and relaxed with a good work-life balance. They want to be happy and not stressed. So that is the second section. Then for the third one, in the bottom left-hand corner, your students are going to note down what the user does. So this section is where they note down any actions or behaviors that they observed during the interviews. So for example, they got more animated when they talked about doing exercise and wanting to get healthy. And they talked about having bad habits like eating lots of sweets and cakes. And then finally, in the bottom right corner, your students will write down what the user hears and sees. And to help with this section, get your students to think about where their users or customers obtain information from. So what or who influences them? Is it social media, friends, family, community members? And what messages are they hearing and seeing which impacts their thinking and their behavior? And this one's important because the environment that our customers or potential customers live in and the things that they are exposed to significantly influence their needs and their wants. So, for example, here your students might note down about their interviewees. They heard on the news that health issues such as diabetes and stress are not good for them. And they see their colleagues going for walks at lunchtime, and it seems to make them more relaxed and efficient in the afternoon. So those are the four main sections of the empathy map: says, does, thinks and feels, and hears and sees. And don't worry so much about exactly which section things need to go in. The most important part is that your students go through this analysis and reflection process to try to draw out the key insights from their research. So next, to finish with this activity, you are going to get your students to analyze their empathy maps by thinking about the needs and the insights which they can draw from them. So needs are the things like food and shelter, anything that supports us to lead a safe and healthy lifestyle. So for example, your students might conclude as in terms of needs that people need good quality, healthy food, and people need affordable places to exercise and be healthy. And then the insights are like little sparks that light a fire and help you to come up with ideas. And to help your students to find insights from their empathy maps, they should look for differences between what a person says, feels, does, and thinks, and then ask themselves, why is there a difference? So in our example, the user talked about wanting to do exercise and get healthy, but they also said that they're very busy. So the sort of insight that your students might then come up with is, for example, in our village, there are no places for people to relax and get healthy. The nearest places are in the big city, and that's very far away, and people don't have time to travel there. And that is all there is to it. That is the empathy map activity. And by basing the empathy maps on real data from the empathic interviews, which I explained earlier, this activity can guide your students towards meaningful innovation when they come to think of business ideas, because by that point, they will have a really solid understanding of what the people that they're trying to serve, so their potential customers, and what it is that they really need. So an empathy map is a great tool for your students to put the customer first, because your customers are more likely to choose and buy products which meet their needs rather than just their wants, which is why this is a really valuable first step in the journey to coming up with a successful business idea. We're nearly finished. I just have one more short activity which follows on from this to explain, and then at the end, as I said, we'll have time to discuss them all together. So the final activity which I'm going to explain today, it's a very simple one, and it is creating a problem statement. So a problem statement, it explains the problem that your students want to solve by focusing on the insights that they gathered and the needs that they identified through carrying out their empathic interviews, and then analysing the information in their empathy maps. So a problem statement should be written in this format, which is blank, that's the user or the users, might need a way to blank, that's the needs that your students identified in the empathy mapping. That, or because, or but, blank, that last part is the insight. So let me give you a couple of examples so it should make a bit more sense. So a problem statement could be business people and students, those are the users, the interviewees, need a way to rest and relax, the needs, because they work or study for 8 hours a day. That's the insight. Another example could be business people and students need a quick and affordable way to do exercise because traditional gyms are too far away and expensive. So that's all there is to it. And you should try to make sure that your students' problem statements are truly based on the facts that they established in the interview and their insights from the empathy maps. And at this point, it's important to note that your students don't need to have thought yet of a solution to solve the problem, because that is what we will be exploring in the next webinar, in webinar number 9. So there you have it. Those are the 3 activities which your students can do to understand the problems and needs in their community and to empathise with their potential customers. We've got a couple of minutes left now to discuss what you think about these activities. So if anybody has any comments or questions or would like to share something with the rest of the group, please feel free to let me know in the chat box now. I'll just give you a minute or two to write any questions or comments that you might have. I can just see that lots of you are saying that you like the sound of the activities and they're creative and doable. That's great to hear. Just give you another minute or so to let me know if you've got any more comments or questions. Okay. Lots of nice comments, no questions by the looks of it. So I will leave it there because I'm afraid that that's all that we've got time for today. But if you would like to learn more about what we've discussed today, then I have included some links to an article and a couple of videos which you can check out online. And in the next webinar, which is number 9, we will be looking at creativity and problem solving and how your learners can take forward what they've learned from the activities which I explained today to come up with really innovative and interesting business ideas which will meet the needs of the people in their community that they identified through these activities. And I also wanted to let you know, in the next webinar, we are hoping to use breakout rooms for the first time. So everyone that attends, we're going to be splitting you into smaller groups so that you can turn on your video and your microphone and actually speak to each other to discuss together the content of the webinar. So make sure to come back for webinar 9 and join us for that. We haven't released the schedule of when webinar 9 is happening yet. It will be in the next week or two. So make sure to follow us on social media to be the first to hear about it. And remember that if you're not already taking part in the School Enterprise Challenge, you can find out everything that you need to know and register for free via our website, www.schoolenterprisechallenge.org. And finally, as promised, you can get your attendance certificate by filling in a very short survey. It's working a little bit differently today. I won't be able to share the survey with you right now, but I'm going to send you the link to the survey by email tomorrow, along with these presentation slides. And your feedback is really important to help us develop future webinars that are of interest and useful to you. So please do keep an eye out for the email and make sure to fill in the short survey to get your attendance certificate. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us again today. It was a pleasure to have you all here, and goodbye from me. That's all for now. I'll just stay here for another couple of minutes to answer any last questions that you might have, but feel free to go now. And thank you very much for joining us.